Streets. My name is Amanda O'Rourke. I am the Executive Director of 880 Cities, and I am the moderator for this session. It's my privilege to do so. For those not familiar with 880 Cities, we're a nonprofit organization based in Toronto, Canada, which is where I'm joining you all from today. We bring people together to transform mobility and public space. So I'm really excited about the session today. I'm joined by two fantastic speakers, Juanita Hardy and Mike Lydon. We're going to have two short presentations from each of our speakers, and then we're going to have a moderated Q&A. A reminder to everyone, please ask questions using the Q&A section tab on your screen. We will keep track of those throughout the session. You can ask your questions at any time, and we'll save those for the end and hopefully get to all of them. Our speakers on creative placemaking come to this work from very different perspectives and sectors, so excited to dive right in. First up, we have Juanita Hardy. Juanita is founder and managing principal of Tiger Management Consulting Group, a business consulting service firm specializing in executive coaching and creative placemaking in the real estate industry. Hardy has over 45 years of business experience, including 31 years with IBM and over 35 years in the arts as a nonprofit leader, trustee, collector, and patron of the arts. As former senior visiting fellow for creative placemaking for Urban Land Institute, Hardy has spoken extensively on creative placemaking to audiences across the US and in Europe. Her articles and essays have appeared in magazines and journals in the US and abroad. She is one of the authors of ULI's 2020 publication, Creative Placemaking, Sparking Development with Art and Culture. Juanita, you're up first.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here today and to be in conversation with Amanda and Mike. Great panel, and with all of you, and to discuss a topic that is very near and dear to me about creative placemaking, and especially in relation to our topic, getting creative with our streets. Now, my angle on this topic comes from my experience in creative placemaking in the last 8 years in real estate development, combined with my passion for art and my passion for business. And real estate development is where we all meet. It's where developers, along with their partners, planners, elected officials, government, and very importantly, the community come together to create exciting places in our built environment. And so with that context, I'd like to go to the next slide, is to talk about the points I'd like to make in this my brief remarks. One is to set a context for what do we mean by creative placemaking, at least from the perspective from which I come. What's the business case for creative placement? In other words, why is it important? Why should we care about it? How do we, if there are a lot of benefits to be realized, how do we optimize those benefits? And then we'll touch lightly on some resources. Next slide. Let me start with this slide on placemaking, because that's a topic that we hear a lot, and we know, many of us live that word. And as you see here, it is defined from our perspective, combining elements of the built environment in a compelling way that attracts people. And the image that you see here is of Country Club Plaza. It's in Kansas City, Missouri. It is a shopping estate, I'll call it, because it's very plush. The design inspired by the great city of Seville. It was built in the 1920s, situated 4 miles outside of Kansas City. So you had to get there by car, and it is as much in demand today as it was back then. So great idea by the individual that conceived of this concept. Next slide. Creative placemaking on the other side is placemaking. It is also placemaking. Think of it as an innovation innovation of placemaking, but it brings art and culture together with good design. This example, Monroe Street Market, that sits in Washington, D.C., in a community in Northeast Washington. 27 artist studios on the ground floor of 2 of 3 buildings in a large mixed-use project, $250 million project, with an art walk and on one end a plaza and stage, and on the other end, and across the street, a community arts center. The developer who conceived of this did so with community input and decided that that instead of putting retail on the ground floor of these 2 buildings, it made sense to do the arts. And it has proven to be a very worthwhile venture for the community and for the developer. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. Next slide. Another point about creative placemaking is it wears 2 hats, so to speak. Creative placemaking is both a component of a healthy, equitable, thriving community, and it is a strategy for achieving one. Such as the chart on the left, did you see it as a component when you think about all of the things that make up a great community. Imagine a community without art and culture, right? So it's that. But then it also can be used to address solutions in any one of the other components of a healthy community. In fact, if you want a healthy community, to define one, it has all of these things, and art and culture can play in this space. And you'll see some examples of that as we move along. So next slide. So with that context and definition, then let's switch gears to talk about why is this important? Why do we care? And so I'm framing it as the business case for creative placemaking. And there are at least 3 good reasons that I'd like to share with you. The first one, next slide, is a pure economic reason. The arts contribute in a major way to the US economy. It represents 4.5%, $878 billion, 5.1 million jobs it supports, and it ranks ahead of other big industries like construction and transportation and tourism. Next slide. Another reason is arts drive revenue to local businesses. The average attendee to an art event like theater or say to a movie or to a concert spends over $31 per person. And that's not including the cost of the ticket. That's with things like restaurant and parking and so forth. And if you're coming from outside the area, an attendee coming from the outside spends more, something like $47, over $47 per person. So art promotes local businesses. And then another reason, next slide, is that the community, people like you and me think it's important. At least those surveyed, over 3,000, say 90% of them agree that institutions, that art is important to quality of life, and 86% believe that it's important to local businesses and the economy. So there's the financial or the economic argument. The second reason, and let's go to the next slide, that is important, is that everybody benefits from it. All the stakeholders benefit. And I've just listed 3 of some of the major stakeholders. But when you think about the framing that I just provided, first of all, for the community, it's going to improve economic outcomes in that community, right? It's going to support health and also social cohesion, bring people together. On the government side, with more revenue flows, that means more tax revenue. And on the developer side, the Monroe Street Market project that I mentioned, the developer reported they had faster lease ups, they had higher retention rate, they had improved cycle of project management, so it saved cost in that. And the community bought into it because the community was engaged in the process. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason, next slide, and I talked about this earlier, is that the solutions that creative placemaking and art and culture enable especially in this time of COVID. Here's an example of seating in Times Square in New York City during a time when we have to be separate, but we need to be connected. So here's creative seating that allows people to be together, but also maintain their distance. Next slide. And in this example, we have signage that's educating commuters about social distancing. Oh, I should mention that everything I'm showing you now are all designed and led by artists, right? And you see the artist names there. So here is a transportation center that is using this signage to encourage transit passengers to wear their mask and maintain their distance. This is one of 6 projects that was supported by Smart Growth America. Next slide. The next one is another one of the Smart Growth America projects, which is an artist designed campaign to help people of color who don't want to wear masks because they're afraid of social profiling or racial profiling. And so the campaign was designed to reimagine masks, talk about the history of masks, rich history, especially in the African culture and other indigenous cultures, and also to use masks to protect against COVID. This is the artist, Tosha Steinledge, as you see there. Next slide. Another example is the memorial that's planned that will sit along the Brick Line Greenway. It's a greenway that's going to connect 22 miles and connect up to 20 neighborhoods in St. Louis. The memorial will be one of the spots that you pass by on foot, walking, or perhaps biking. And the memorial is to honor this community, Mill Creek Valley, that was flattened in the 1950s in the name of urban renewal. So each one of those structures that you see there represents a house or a building that was flattened. Over 200 thriving businesses and residential buildings were flattened in that period. So it still has a painful memory, but this helps to heal that painful past and also celebrate the memories of that place. And then the final example, next slide, is Charlotte Rail Trail. And this represents a utility path that existed to serve the new light rail coming through Charlotte. It's 4.5 miles, connects neighborhoods, and has art features all along it, including this magic carpet is called, that was developed by the artists you see there, Jesse and Katie. And so people enjoy as they're walking or as they're biking, looking at artful features along the way. Edna's porch, the image you see on the right, harkens back to sitting on the porch and a tradition, a Southern tradition of neighbors connecting on each other's porches and greeting passersby. So these are wonderful art features that it has been so successful that businesses have turned the front of their buildings that along the path to the path, right? So it's doing a lot of promoting of local businesses. So these are some examples of how art can play in design, in streets, in communities, and creating better, healthier communities. Now, how do we optimize realizing some of the benefits, potential benefits of creative placemaking, art, and culture? And that takes us to the next slide, which is 10 best practices in creative placemaking. Now, these best practices are based on research over a long period of time that dates during the time that I served as a senior visiting fellow for creative placemaking for ULI during that time period, and continues to be refreshed, but always so far has held to be the 10 factors that really play a big role in optimizing benefits. And if you had to pick, and these best practices that you see speak to who to get engaged, when, what skills to use, what are the major concerns to ensure a successful project. And if you had to pick one project, one of these, excuse not problem, one best practice, then it's engaging artists in the community early in the process. There's real benefits to early engagement and really artists and community-led efforts. Let me give an example of that in the next example, which is Crosstown Concourse in Memphis, Tennessee. This is a project that is now called an urban village. It's a mixed-use project. It's about a $200 million project. The founders or visionaries behind this are an artist professor and teamed with his partner, who was an artist, founded a nonprofit arts organization. So therefore artist engagement early and community engagement early, held over 200 community meetings soliciting input on the design of this building. It's situated in Midtown Memphis, where it's in a low-income, underserved community. So they wanted to serve the surrounding community. That was one of the goals. It's based in the concept, or anchored in the concept, of art, wellness, and education. Inside that building, there are residential, there's commercial, there are health organizations, there is a charter school, there is curated retail, there is ongoing program that occurs on the street in front, as you see there, and inside the building. When they opened their doors in October 2017, they were 98% leased. So whether you are looking at a project of this size or a street, a single street, a block, these ideas hold, and these ideas contribute to building that healthy, equitable, safe street where people want to come and be a part of. So let me go to the last slide, almost last slide, next to the last slide. If you want to know more, here's some resources that you can access. The articles are all online. Just key in the name. I think if you key in urban land in the name. And then there's a publication that just came out. Right now, it's accessible only to ULI members. So those of you that are members, you can get it. And I am exploring how it can be accessed by others. So next slide. It's been my pleasure to share these thoughts with you, and I look forward to the discussion. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Juanita. Such beautiful pictures. And I see that there's already questions. Keep them coming. We're going to get to them after the second presentation. Thanks, everyone. So next I have Mike Lydon. Mike is the co-founder of Street Plans, an urban planning, design, and research advocacy firm based in Miami and New York City. Mike is an internationally sought after planner, author, speaker, and designer of livable cities. Mike lives in Brooklyn with his wife and son, and encourages you to trade 4 wheels for 2. Mike, take it away.
Great, thank you, Amanda, and thanks for that presentation, Juanita. I'd actually never seen the numbers broken down by sector like that in terms of the impact, art and culture, transportation. Looks like if you combine the two, like we like to do in our projects, that actually could potentially exceed the healthcare sector. So anyways, really interesting examples and really inspiring examples. Thank you. So quickly, we work a lot at that intersection between transportation and public space, and we try to encourage the arts and community art and community participation in all the things that we do. And here are just 4 examples from Miami, largely projects led by my partner, Tony Garcia, who runs our Miami office. But we've done a lot of this type of work around the city, both in very temporary ways and slightly more interim or permanent ways. So if you're around the
Miami... Quick interjection. Can you get your slides full screen? We're seeing them not in full screen right now. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, how's that? Sorry. If I go to full screen mode, it should pop in. Do you see it?
We're still seeing the tabs on the side where it says like create PDF and.
I'm not seeing that at all on my end.
It's okay.
You can still see the bottom of the slide though? Okay. Yeah.
We can, yeah.
For that. Well, I'll just keep going anyways. The aesthetics won't be quite as good, unfortunately. So a lot of our work in our company has always been about counteracting conventional project delivery, seeing that that can do more harm than good, or there's a long history of conventional project delivery doing more harm than good. This is an image of Interstate 95 plowing through Overtown in downtown Miami. And if you live locally, you know what kind of devastation that wrought in that neighborhood, in that part of the city, and how much that's cut people off from each other and from opportunity in Miami. You know, the thinking or the rationale behind large scale projects, the ambition is great, but in reality, those projects are very slow and extremely expensive, oftentimes wind up breeding mistrust with the public, and unfortunately, because of the scale, are very static and inflexible. I think when these projects were built, that was definitely the case, but even now, today, we see the negative impact from a climate perspective, from an emissions perspective, right? Not just a social and equity perspective. Unfortunately, cities are still making these decisions, throwing good money after bad. Miami's, you know, is one example, but Miami's definitely not alone. There's cities all over the country who are putting hundreds of millions, if not billions, into the expansion of freeways. And so our work is about rethinking, well, what if you didn't have to focus on such large scale, large projects that don't necessarily serve members of the community, and think about a way to kind of reverse that process and think about things in interim and temporary ways that could inform the kinds of projects that we should be investing those hundreds of millions or billions of dollars within. So with quick build projects, you know, just to explain what this approach is about, it's really a subset of tactical urbanism, right? Tactical urbanism is about short-term projects that lead to or inspire long-term transformation. And quick build within that is projects that last anywhere from a month to 5 years or longer, both as a pilot project, which you can be testing concepts and ideas to measure the impact quantitatively and qualitatively, as well as interim design. So what happens when you have a successful pilot, but you don't have millions of dollars to go build something, you know, right away to scale that project up in terms of its materiality and its durability? That's where interim design has a role to play. So these projects can be at a very, very small scale. They can cost as little as $300 or $3,000, or on up to about $300,000. It's typically the budget range for what we call a quick build project. And the process of the delivery is critical. It's all about having people who are not necessarily experts in the field of urbanism participating and contributing to the creation of the infrastructure or the changes. That could be the art, that could be installing traffic markings, that could be installing signage. It really is a really important way to engage people other than asking them to come to meetings, coming to charrettes, coming to presentations such as this. It's very much a hands-on approach. So prior to COVID, just a quick snapshot of an example of the quick build process. This is a project in Asheville, North Carolina. And this is a corridor that is undergoing a lot of changes in land use. There's new breweries, there's artist studios, new condos that have been going up, and this is just on the edge of downtown Asheville. And so the sense was that the street wasn't really serving as seeing the needs of the changing uses on the street. A lot more pedestrian traffic with all those different uses was being generated, and the street needed to be more pedestrian and bike friendly. The city also had resources to invest in the long term to redesign and reimagine the entire streetscape here. So the Cox Avenue project was about trying out some of the infrastructural changes that could be put into play in the long term over the course of 1 year. So like most of our projects, we undertook a very robust co-design process. So it was working with immediate stakeholders all along this corridor, but also with cities and arts and a variety of different partners to deliver the project, including Asheville on Bikes, which is one of our main partners and our funder for this work in the city.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. I don't think we're seeing your slides advancing on our end. If you can try, there you go. That's going.
All right, I was in full screen mode. I'm not sure why. Yeah, you weren't seeing them. Can you see these now? Yeah?
Yes, we're still making bad and expensive. Yes, it's advancing now. Sorry.
Got it. Well, sorry about that. Speak up if there's any other technical glitches here. So there's Cox Avenue. You can see on the left existing and what we put in as an interim measure, I should say, with wider sidewalks and curb extensions, planters, et cetera. And then the co-design process. So here was we were engaging more than 120 different people to deliver the project over the course of 1 weekend. So this project, as you can see, included very much a focus on creative placemaking. SoundMind Creative is a local arts and graphic design studio, and they were a key collaborator in developing this beautiful mural of butterflies, which is intended to symbolize the transformation of the street. And so because of these interim projects, what's really the important possibilities are is measuring the impact, right? Both qualitatively and quantitatively. And that information can be fed into this long-term project that's going to reinvest and reimagine the entire streetscape with permanent infrastructure. So it really was a test of these changes and to see what people liked or disliked on the street. What we learned, just one snapshot of data, was that average speeds were reduced by 28% along the corridor with these changes. 2 out of 3 cars were speeding beforehand, but after it was 1 out of 5. Believe it or not, the highest speed that we clocked on the street prior to the intervention was at 89 miles per hour, and the highest speed after was 41, which is still too fast, but certainly much better than 89. And really the street handled the exact same amount of vehicular flow. In terms of value capture, we worked with State of Place. Some of you may know Mariela Alfonso. She's a Miami native. She has this great company called State of Place that does a lot of the evaluation of changes to streets or the value of anticipated changes to streets. And so she looked at the before condition and the after with her platform, which takes into account 200 plus different variables. And we saw the place score rise from a 42.3 to almost a 72. And then the economic benefit of this project was anticipated to be $3.5 million, which was a ROI of $23.40 for every dollar that we spent on the project, including time and materials. And so that's a really big value add in terms of the infrastructural changes to be expected. But really at the end of the day, this is what matters to me most. It's seeing people who can use the street safely and enjoy going about their daily lives and feel safe on our streets and in our public spaces. So all that data is great. We have to also remind ourselves that this is kind of the outcome that we should be seeking. If we have achieved this, we know we've had success. So that's quick build, as an example before COVID. Clearly, there was a different layer of focus to the work over the last year. This need to spread out and stay apart, particularly early on when we didn't know how this virus was being transmitted. We had very little knowledge about what was going on. Everyone felt very awkward, if you remember, being on the streets together. You were passing each other's with big distances, and all of a sudden we realized that the autocentricity of our streets and the way our cities were designed did not really make spreading out possible. There's this great video of somebody actually in Amanda's city in Toronto who went out and put this large 6-foot radius around himself and walked down the street, proving how difficult it was to socially distance. But I think beyond that, we really saw clearly the shortcomings of the urban design of so many of our streets and public spaces. And so at Street Plans, we started to document right out of the gate there, the kinds of changes that cities started to make from an infrastructure perspective. And with each passing week, it seemed like more and more cities were making very, very quick sort of tactical changes to the streetscape to allow for distancing and to service people and businesses, as well as to deliver services using streets and public spaces while the pandemic raged on and only increased in around the globe. So here you see 6 different types of interventions. This work that we cataloged early on in the pandemic helped inform and create a collaboration with NACTO and the Global Designing Cities Initiative out of NACTO, which I believe Zabe is addressing this conference. She probably has spoken about this as well. This was really looking at all the different kinds of changes that could happen that would be primarily focused on moving and safely addressing the public health emergency, but could also then help cities recover in the mid to long term as the pandemic hopefully begins to recede. And so this is emerging guidance and emerging practice where we pull together all sorts of different types of changes that could be made to our streets and public spaces to make them healthier and safer during COVID, but certainly after COVID as well. And I think that's particularly important given the disparities that we've seen from neighborhood to neighborhood and who this impacts the most in terms of the disease and how that's being spread. So really fundamental work that can guide cities and how they think about streets and public spaces. And of course, this, from going from diagram to reality, this is what this starts to look like around, actually really around the New York Metro. I've not done as much travel as usual, but these are all pictures from Jersey City and New York City. And you can see the use and some of the formality and informality, including the person down there in the middle who is set up shop cutting hair underneath the Williamsburg Bridge. To Juanita's point, this stuff matters from an economic perspective. Our outdoor dining, which was desirable and a nice to have pre-COVID, was an absolute lifeline for the economy. It has been during the pandemic. We have since made this program permanent in New York. Our mayor announced that this fall, that the more than 10,000 restaurants that were operating on streets and sidewalks could continue to do so in perpetuity. And the program itself was credited with saving 100,000 jobs, and a lot of those being jobs through obviously the service workers that need that work. And when the restaurants shut down, that has a very negative impact clearly on the economy and on individuals who already don't have a lot of economic resources. So this really was a critical economy saving measure that utilized the availability of public space and repurposed it for dining and for letting New Yorkers be New Yorkers and try to get close together again, at least outdoors, to have to share in meals. Now, the interesting thing is that this basically became the largest parking reform measure maybe in America's history. And what we started to look at is some of the numbers behind converting a single parking space and what the city could expect from a revenue perspective in terms of metered parking, and then the tax revenue generated from dining and retail sales in that same amount of space. And what we've found is back in the envelope that you'd have almost a 500% increase in revenue that could be made possible. I'll come back to this in a minute. So I want to end this this quick presentation with a note about scaling up and what needs to be considered in doing so. We've got so many new programs, a lot of innovation, a lot of changes to our streets and public spaces that have happened in a very quick and interim or temporary way. But in order to make these measures more permanent and to think about the value and the benefit of being prepared and able to respond and move quickly in making our streets more welcoming and safer, requires a focus to project delivery and certain elements that is not really in the day-to-day process in most cities. And so that's going to have to change if this work is to be made more permanent. And when I say scaling up, I mean like over in Jersey City, where there's been 10 miles of protected bike lanes built in the last 12 months, right? Like that kind of scale of how do we really quickly roll out network and corridor changes that result in large-scale mobility gains at a fraction of the cost. So I'm gonna have 7 different points here to end this talk. One is to understand transportation in context. There is the land use context, of course, and the kind of built context in which we think about transportation, and that's been the sole focus or the primary focus for transportation planners for a long time. But there's the social piece to this, right? And so just thinking about how we roll out bike lanes or create different public spaces and streets has to be much more nuanced in how we engage with various communities. That if people have been asking, as this example from this tweet, if people have been asking for better economic development, more affordable housing, fixing the street light, and then you show up with something that no one's ever asked for, that can be a really problematic way to start engaging with a community. And so I think that's something that was really laid bare this spring and summer through all the social unrest, all the challenges that we've had between racial and economic justice in our country. And I think now more than ever, those of us who are involved with transportation have to take that seriously and see it clearly that there's all these different contexts in which we work. And so as people scale up or think about delivering on the promise of some of the changes made during the pandemic, we also have to take this into account first and foremost. Second of all, codifying and supporting flexible streets. I think this flexibility is something that is not really baked into the process of managing streets and public spaces in most places. And it's really proven to be a critical element of the work, that our streets can be changed and adapted based on the time of the day of the week, the month and the year. And we have to think about the processes and measures that have to be put into place to allow for that to happen. That's from the regulatory side, it's from a stewardship and management side, and certainly from a funding side. And I'll get into some of those pieces here. Not one, but three, lower the barrier to entry. In New York City, it was expensive and difficult to get permission to operate a cafe outdoors. It's long been the case. With the pandemic, all of those rules melted away. Basically, the City Department of Transportation created a self-certification process where you had to meet very basic life and safety measures for operating in the curb lane or operating what we call streeteries in the seat, like you see here. And if those measures were taken, then you were fine to do so. And it led to this flowering of outdoor public life and the economic recovery I described earlier in just a matter of days. So there's a real lesson there, I think, for every city to think about, and what are these barriers that we put into place without really thinking about their implication and how we can reduce some of that barrier for folks who need access to the market, right? And this is what we proved so robustly in New York. But to have the flexibility to manage streets differently may mean some different types of infrastructure as well. And so here's a great example from Jackson Heights in Queens, where these telescoping planters can open up and close depending on the time of the day to close it off for socializing, for activity, and of course for dining in a little restaurant pocket in that neighborhood. So really creative solution, something that allows for people to drive most of the time, but other times on nights or weekends, it becomes a usable public space. Thinking about that kind of approach, I think, is going to be really important if we're to maintain and continue the kinds of changes that have been made during the pandemic. 5, materials. I mean, a lot of cities put out what they had or what they could order or rent quickly, and that looked very much like traffic-y materials, orange cones and bollards and barriers. And aesthetically, that doesn't work for a lot of people for the obvious reasons. We don't want our streets always looking like a construction zone. And so the materials that come next, even if they're not permanent curb and concrete and landscaping, there's a whole wide range of materials that can be considered that can take these projects to the next step. And each one of these has a different kind of cost implication, maintenance protocol that has to be thought of as well. And so this is the point I know that a lot of cities are at right now in the US, is thinking about what comes next, what can we afford, how do we maintain it, and for how long will it last until we need to think about permanence. 6 out of 7, establishing, sustaining a stewardship plan. Obviously critical work to make sure that these public spaces can be programmed and maintained in perpetuity. This is one of the trickier things I think that communities have to deal with, is finding the resources and the people on the ground who can physically manage and take care of these spaces. This will be probably the most important thing in terms of sustainability of the changes that have been made during the pandemic and moving forward. And then finally, leveraging the value that has been created. As I mentioned earlier, with the parking space revenue that's been, that might be 3x, 4x, 5x more than a single parking space in terms of the revenue generated for the city, there's a real opportunity here to redistribute that value creation and allow for the stewardship, the maintenance, the programming in neighborhoods that are least served by business improvement districts or other entities that support that kind of work and help manage our streets. There's a lot of areas that are underserved in that regard. And so this is an opportunity to take that excess value that we can create in our wealthier areas, redistribute it to areas that need it most to help those communities and those businesses. And finally, just to make this point, we've seen an incredible amount of social and I'd say physical resilience in our cities in the last 12 months. We need that in our streets for our resilient cities in the long term. And so that starts with little kids on up to all of us can take part in these types of changes and can really make our communities stronger and our cities stronger. And for me, there's really no better way to start doing that than working in the streets. So I will end there and we will take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And Juanita, if I can ask you to come join us again. So we have quite a few questions. I'll dive right in because we have only, I think, 5 minutes left. So this question is for you, Juanita. What was the process that brought the design of the Brickline Memorial to life? Was public involved, and who led the initiative?
Yes. Okay. So the initiative, thank you for that question, Amanda, and whoever asked. The project was led by, or is led, because it's still a project in the works, by Great Rivers Greenway, Great Rivers GRG. I think I may have lost the last name, but if you go online, query GRG and Brickline Greenway, and it will pop up. They've been doing greenways in the St. Louis, Missouri area for, I want to say 20 years. They're a nonprofit. So they get their money through government, a combination of government funding and foundation funding and so forth. So that's how they've raised the capital to do this. They also are in collaboration with developers who are very interested in points along the greenway. Like I mentioned, this is a 20-mile greenway. So there's lots of opportunity for development along the greenway, and they are looking at how they can, partner with GRG and do development efforts that are a spinoff of this. So there's a big economic growth potential in this. The way it started is they assembled a group of community folks because they want this to be community-driven, community-led, community-designed. They even have an artist guild. I'm not calling it by its right name, but a group of local artists that are also involved in the design. And they're tapping communities as they're making their way from one community to the next, connecting the greenway. They're bringing the community in advance of that to get their input. It's a great example of how to do this with artists and the community. I invite you to look up online an article, a recent Urban Land article that talks about this project, and it's called Leveraging Creative Placemaking for Equitable Development. I think it was in the list that I provided at the end of my presentation. So I'll stop there because there's lots more to say about it, but I know we don't have a lot of time.
No, that's great, Juanita. Excellent answer. I'm going to jump to a question I think intended to you, Mike. I think you're going to love this one. It's one of my, when we do quick build projects, permitting. So what is the impact on permitting in these types of quick build projects? How can cities and counties improve permitting in order to make these types of projects a reality?
Right, great question. Well, I mean, the permitting system that we have in our communities, which I'm sure why the question is asked, does not really lend itself to quick build. And so I think rethinking that process and understanding that there are very common measures that we can use, from event permitting to maintenance of traffic protocols that cities have around, temporary construction projects or roadway construction, can be repurposed to fit the needs of a quick build project. Although I would definitely say that where cities are designing or developing a policy and a process for this, it goes a lot faster and more smoothly. A lot of the clients we've worked with in the last decade have had to basically kind of create the space for this work to be done, but have been really, building the plane as they fly it, so to speak, and trying to find ways to get to yes, and then of course proving the success or proving the process out, and then learning from that, and then being able to replicate that moving forward. So there's only a handful of cities that have done that work, but I think it's going to be really critical in terms of being able to utilize this as an ongoing approach to project delivery. And I'm happy to answer questions further over email about what some of those example cities are.
Thank you. And this one actually could be for both of you. I think both of you really touched on the importance of community engagement and building trust and having local representation in these projects. So the question is, how do you actually locate those community members, and what method has been most successful in your experience in building those trusted relationships with community members and having them a key part of the process? Juanita, why don't you go first, and then Mike?
Okay, sure. Well, I two things. One is look at the community organizations that exist in the neighborhoods or that are concerned about community activities and community engagement. Usually those are nonprofit organizations. And also artists and organizations that represent artists. That's a good place to start, because artists are often going into a community can be a challenge because the goal, before you can have any real meaningful activity, there has to be trust, right? And so artists often, or in community organizations, often represent that trust element that can facilitate the connections to community members. An example, I mentioned Monroe Street Market. Monroe Street Market engaged a nonprofit called Cultural DC. And I say that the developers, because they knew nothing about the arts, right? And they knew nothing about how do you even design an artist studio, right? So they engaged Cultural DC, who represents artists who are concerned about the well-being of artists and who have been working with other developers to bring creative placemaking into real estate development projects. And so the Cultural DC helped to engage the artists, helped to engage the community. They were big facilitators in that process. And once the project was completed, they continued to be the liaison between the artists and the developer in the process. So I would say that is that building trust and finding those representatives, whether it's an organization or individuals, that can facilitate that process. Mike, I imagine you've had a lot of experience with this in the work that you're doing.
He does, but we have to finish. That was a wonderful answer, and I'm sure that Mike will be available to answer any further questions, as he said. I wish we could keep on this topic for another 30 minutes, I'm sure, but just wanted to say thank you so much to Mike Lydon and Juanita Hardy for a fantastic session in getting the most out of our streets with creative placemaking. So thank you very much, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.